The primary drive gear on my YZ250 is a little beat up, so we're going to replace it, as well as the clutch. We'll need some parts, starting with a new primary drive gear and its mating gear, and a new thrust plate. This is a new washer and a new bolt for the gear. We'll also use some gear oil, an impact gun, torque wrench, and some gaskets. So for the clutch side of things, we'll need a new basket, new washer, and a new bearing. And we'll be reusing the spacer for the clutch basket. And here's a new clutch boss with a new thrust plate and some circlips. Here's a new push rod with its bearing and washer, and then a nut and a lock washer for the boss. Here are some new clutch plates taking a bath. Pressure plate, a spring, and more springs. To start out, we will lube up the new primary drive gear and its associated gear. We'll do that before we go to remove the old broken primary drive gear. So here's the washer for the primary drive bolt. You see it has this chamfered surface. It's the darker ring in the middle there. We want that chamfered surface to be sticking out. So now we'll go remove the old gear. Sometimes you just need a little extra juice. So now I can take it out, and you'll see that this is the one with that big notch in it that you saw at the beginning of the video, right here. Now we can install the new thrust plate, new primary drive gear, and a new mating gear. We'll put on the washer and bolt just finger tight on top of those. Now we're lubing up the clutch basket, the reused spacer, and the new bearing. We'll put those together. And here's the washer for the basket. Here is the splined thrust washer for the clutch boss, the nut and lock washer. First thing we'll put on is that plain washer, then the spacer and the bearing, and then the clutch basket. Next up comes the splined thrust washer, then the clutch boss. Then the lock washer and nut. Now we'll be using a clutch holding tool to torque down that inner nut. Now we need to bend this tab to lock it in. Use some pliers for that. Nice and smooth. Here's the push rod for the clutch. So we'll install the bearing and the washer on it after we lube them up. And then we'll also lock it in with the circlip. I installed the circlip off camera because that can be a doozy sometimes. So we'll put the push rod in and the pressure plate on, and we can put in our clutch springs. After that, we'll put in our bolts and torque them down in a crisscross pattern. We can temporarily install the Kickstarter here to help us out to hold the clutch in place. Now this is my first attempt at torquing down the primary drive gear. I tried to use the clutch holding tool, but I just could not get enough torque on it. I didn't want to ruin the pressure plate. So my next idea was to fold up a piece of paper like 6 times and jam that in there. And that worked a little better for me. Now we will put some grease on the gasket surface for the right case, and this just helps hold the gasket in place so that you can get a nice seal. It doesn't really do anything else. There you go. And I put both dowels on the engine side just to again help hold the gasket in place. So now installing the right case. It's a little tricky. We want to mesh these 2 gears, the governor and water pump gears, with that new primary drive gear. So it's kind of tough. You have to play around with it a little bit, get it close, and then when you're actually installing it, you can move the clutch basket a little bit with your offhand to help make things work. And we'll torque these down in a crisscross pattern. Up here at the power valve linkage, we're going to stick a punch in that hole so you don't bend the linkage when we tighten down that bolt. And then we'll grease up the gasket surface for the power valve cover. And I stuck the gasket to the case side here, so you don't really see it, but it's in there. Now we'll install the clutch cover, and like you guessed, we'll torque it down in a crisscross pattern. Now we can install the Kickstarter for real. So we'll put it up there and then bolt it down and torque it down. And then all that there's left to do is to put that radiator hose on, tighten down the clamp. And she is good to go.